Dr. Andrea McAlister teaches piano pedagogy, group piano, and coordinates the secondary piano studies at Oberlin. Her research on neural development, motivation, language, group teaching, and technology has been featured at national conferences for numerous organizations, including but not limited to the International Society of Musical Education, Music Teachers National Association, and more. McAlister, Dr. McAlister also serves as the Director of Digital Programming for the Francis Clark Center for Keyboard Pedagogy, where she is also Senior Editor for Piano Magazine. She's an inaugural member of the Yamaha Master Educator Collective in Keyboard Pedagogy and an active clinician and adjudicator, as well as a division director of our very own MTNA. And today, Dr. Andrea McAlister is here to talk to us about forming better habits. And I'm going to leave off at that. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation, for inviting me here. It's so lovely to talk to all of you today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart because I am particularly one who relies on habits more than maybe more than normal. So, my research in this, in habit formation and attention has been many years in the making. So I'm so happy to talk to you all about it today. Before we get started, I know you just mentioned that I've done a lot of work in neural development and how we actually learn. I do want to give a really short plug, if I may. I'm usually not self-promotional, but I'm working on a project right now that I am so excited about, and I want to share it with you. So I'm gonna screen share really quickly. I don't know who knows about the new publication from the Francis Clark Center called Piano Inspires Kids. But it's I am so thrilled to work on this magazine with my co-editor-in-chief, Sarah Ernst. The winter issue, which you see here, is the music of Florence Price, and it's just a fabulous issue. We had the most amazing contributors to this issue. I do want to point out that there are so many opportunities for your students to contribute to the magazine as well. So we want to feature your students from all over the world, and we have. So please check it out. It's kids.pianoinspires.com. I bring this up because our spring issue, which I was just editing actually, is on how we learn and the importance of music study and neural development. So we're really excited about this issue. So I encourage you to check that out because it also talks about some of the things we're going to talk about today, but in a very kid-friendly way, which I think is really important because so often we talk about these things and we talk about how the importance of music study is for children, and we talk about the importance of developing good practice habits, but that doesn't always make it into their attention. So another way that we can help them and direct the information directly to them. All right, so I'm going to start my presentation here. Here we go, and I'm going to do this and this. All right, so talking about habits. I think I've just lost all of you. So let's see, can I see you? And let's see. All right, I've lost the ability to see you. So if anybody has anything you want to alert me of, just unmute and let me know, because now I can only see my slides. So fortunately or unfortunately.
If you mouse up into the upper right corner of the meeting, do you see anything at all, or is it just that black screen of habits and Dr. Andrea McAlister?
It's just me.
You don't see a little gray box that says the word view next to it in the very upper right-hand corner?
No, I don't. I'm working on two screens too, so this
Okay.
probably has something to do with it. But we'll just kind of go with this. And if anyone has anything to say, feel free to unmute and tell me all about your thoughts. And there will be time at the end for questions too. Okay, so I'm hoping you could see not my presenter view, but just the main screen. We'll go with that. We're talking about habits. All right, so in my daily life, like I said, I really, really rely on habits. And we all do. So this is my typical morning at home. I get up, I make coffee, I get the kids ready for school, I do Wordle, I get the kids out the door, and then I sit down and I can actually drink the coffee that I made, depending on what my day happens to look like. This is really something that everyone relies on. I'm sure if you think back to what you did this morning, if it was a typical morning, then this is probably a lot of what your morning looks like as well. You do everything in a certain order. And there are very important cognitive reasons for that. But let's say something is changing and today you had to travel. Now your morning is going to look a lot different because you can't rely on that typical uh, sequence of events that you usually perform every day. So you have to think about, well, first of all, my alarm's going off so early. Why? Oh yeah, that's right, because I'm leaving today. What am I going to wear? How early should I leave? Should I check my flight time? Did I already pack this thing? I do that all the time. I'll pack the night before and then I have those second doubts of, oh, did I really pack that? Do I have all my chargers? Do I need to take food with me? All of those things, decision making that we typically don't have to do on a day-to-day basis. When our schedule is interrupted, we have to go through these decision making processes again. And I point to the early days of the lockdown for the pandemic as a great example of something that we all collectively went through where all of our habits were disturbed. That typical morning that I usually had was just obliterated because I didn't necessarily have to get up my kids up at a certain time to get them to school because now it was online school. And was it synchronous or was it asynchronous? And do I need to be more involved in their learning? What does my teaching look like? Everything had to be remade from the bottom up. And so not only were we dealing with pandemic lockdowns, restrictions, new rules about how to go about our lives in a healthy way, we also had to remake all the decisions that had been put on autopilot for a very long time. And the reasons for this come down to exactly how we learn. If we look at the standard information processing model, we start with a stimulus, which goes into our sensory memory. This lasts for only a few seconds, and either we give attention to it or we just forget about it. And there are so many things that come into our environments every day that we just forget about because we can't pay attention to everything. Now, if we do get attention to this stimulus, then it moves into working memory. And again, that only lasts for seconds. And if we don't continue to pay attention to it, we either forget about it or we rehearse it so that we can learn it better, so we can connect it to other learning, so we can give it the importance it needs, which leads to encoding and long-term memory. At which point I can then retrieve those memories so I can repeat those same processes. These are things we do with our students all the time, right? We want them to sit and pay attention during their lessons so they can have the experience with working memory, the repetition, so they can encode into long-term memory. Well, the beauty of habits is that we can skip over that entire process and go from stimulus to the retrieval of that long-term memory. I don't have to go through all of these processes in order to perform an action. And that saves me a lot of time, first of all, but it really saves me a lot of executive function skills because we only have so much executive function before we have to stop and recharge. Our brains are constantly under construction, learning new information, processing emotions, managing expectations, that it can't do all of the work of encoding while our brains are active. And this executive function, you see, it's about attention, planning ahead, goal setting, motivation, willpower, decision making, time management, all the things that we and our very young students need to get through our days and to be successful, whatever that means in our day. But there are a lot of things that zap that executive function: stress, lack of sleep, poor nutrition, technology, illness, multitasking, which I put in quotes because there is no real such thing as multitasking, our environment, whatever that means for the individual, and decision making. So when our batteries are drained, we cannot make those heavy cognitive decisions that we need to make every single day, every moment of every day, it seems. So when we're in these states, when we have a student that comes to us and says, "Oh my goodness, I had midterms this week and I have all these tests and I have all this studying and I'm really worried about this and that," then that's their executive function is just drained. How can we get them to learn at the piano if they're under that amount of stress? And you could take any one of these entries and say the same thing. So when we have a student who is very healthy in their life and has functioning executive function, then it's much easier to play at the piano. But when we have very well established habits, we can conserve some of these mental resources because it's an unconscious behavior. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to go through that whole process. So we eliminate the decision making. We increase our productivity because we don't have to think about when and where we're going to do certain actions. And really, there's no motivation needed because we just don't even think, we just do. And these habits are so important that they guide 43% of our daily actions. That's almost half of our day that is guided by the habits that we have established. And we know this. We know this as educators. We also know this by looking at, let's say, the world of sports. Now, Michael Phelps is one of the most decorated Olympians of all time. And when he started training at the young age of 7, his coach knew that it was going to be his habits that would be the driver of his success. So it wasn't just about the training, it was about the sequence of habits that they set up for him for every day, not just race days. So when he did have a race that he was competing in, the race was just one of a sequence of habits that he engaged with repeatedly from day to day. And so these habits really became the pattern by which he lived his daily life. So when we talk about developing habits, I think one thing we assume is that it is an unconscious development. Well, in many cases, and maybe more cases than would be good, it is unconscious. We probably have determined a certain time of day to brush our teeth in a very unconscious manner. It was just something that developed over time because you found that it worked for you. And now you always remember to brush your teeth at a certain time of the day. So yes, a lot of habits developed unconsciously, but we are also able to develop habits in a conscious manner. When we really think about what habits we want to establish, it could build in a lot of efficiencies and successes into our day. Now, while we do often say it takes 2 months to establish a habit, that's not necessarily true. It really depends on the type of habit that we are trying to build. Some of these conscious habits that we're trying to build could take a lot longer. It could take months, years to develop an appropriate habit. Sometimes it takes only a week or two to get that habit established. But the important part is this area here where we talk about paying attention. we have to pay attention to the habits that we wish to establish and understand the why and when we are doing certain things and if it really works. But as we know from our students and ourselves, actually, there's so much to pay attention to these days. It's about where we're shining our flashlights. And if you do research into attention, they talk about the flashlight and the floodlight. So if we're shining a flashlight onto something, it's really focusing in on one particular stimulus. And we can get stuck in our flashlights, or our flashlights might not shine exactly where we want them to. So we could have the external, somebody entering a room. Notice I have phone and computer, so technology are big things. Sudden noises, temperatures, our clothing can create certain shifts of attention for us. Anybody talking outside or aromas. So really depending on the individual, these stimuli can be very distracting, can be very attention grabbing. But we can also shine our flashlight internally, which we know. Decision-making, stress, conflict, fatigue, multitasking, hunger, all these things that we can't see from the outside. Someone could be very focused internally, and we don't really realize it just by looking at them. I like the last two, the rumination, which they titled the loop of doom, where we just keep replaying things from our past over and over and go, oh, I wish I would have done that differently. That happens quite often. But also we have Zeigarnik intrusions, which I find very interesting. It's those unfinished tasks that keep interrupting your workflow. It happens quite often because the brain likes closure. It likes things to be done. And if we haven't completed a certain task, our brains will interrupt us no matter what other task we're trying to focus on. And what I find interesting about attention and shining our flashlights where we want to shine them is that we are all really swimming in a sea of distraction. We are not set up as human beings to focus on one stimulus for long periods of time. We just did not develop that way as human beings because there are so many things in our environment that we may have to pay attention to, that we have to pay attention to. And so we are not designed to focus in, laser focus for a very long period of time. But we do have these islands of attention where something grabs us and we are able to focus in for periods of time. You might call it flow. You might just find it attentional interest. But we do have these moments every day, multiple times a day, where we are able to get onto that island and stop swimming in the sea of distraction. Here's my example. So we have our working memory, and what they consider working memory to be, and I like this analogy, is like a whiteboard on which you write with invisible or with disappearing ink. So I write something on my working memory, but if I don't keep repeating it, then it just disappears. So for instance, you could say, oh, this presentation is interesting. But then if something distracts you, then you're gone. So we have to keep writing on that whiteboard, oh, this is interesting. I'm really paying attention. I'm on my island of attention. That's the rehearsal part, the repetition. But let's say you say, oh, this presentation is so interesting. Oh, look, I got an email. Oh, I should go check that email to see if it's important. Well, it's not important, but I'm going to go check Instagram because that's open on the tab right next to it. So I might as well check while I'm here. What, my friend is in Hawaii? I had no idea. I think I'm going to plan a vacation. I'm going to do some research. Maybe I'll do, oh, the Caribbean sounds nice. Oh, I'm going to look at these YouTube videos. And then you go, oh, presentation's over already? What did I miss? This happens constantly in our lives, and especially because of technology, which we'll get into a little bit more in a moment. But this also leads us to this $100 term, perceptual decoupling, where we seem to be physically present, but mentally we are worlds away because our flashlight of attention is shining internally. I'm sure you could all think of instances where you're having a conversation with someone face to face and you have no idea what they're saying because your flashlight is pointed inside instead of at what they are talking to you about. So researchers in attention actually estimate that you miss 50% of your day. 50% of the stimuli that is in our surroundings will just pass us by because we can't pay attention to everything. So there's good news and bad news. The good news is your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. We cannot pay attention to everything. But the bad news is that attention is difficult to sustain. So as educators, I find that teaching is really the art of directing that light to the places we need it directed with our students. So I love this. Within the human cognitive system, attention is precious, it's limited. So as designers of learning experiences, we also have to think of ourselves as stewards of students' limited stores of attention. And one way to do this is to help them build intentional habits so that some of the decision making, some of the attention that needs to be focused on the music while they're at the piano or while they are at their instrument can be focused not just getting there and not just deciding what to do, but focused on what needs to happen during that practice session. And we're going to do this in 3 ways: context, repetition, and reward. So let's start with context. So unfortunately, I'm going to give you a little math equation today. What was interesting, I had a pedagogy assignment that was due this week, and most of the students used math as being hard as their example for their pedagogy assignment. So here is our math equation for the day. B equals F times PE. So our behavior is a function of the person in their environment. So our behavior is determined by how we interact or how we behave in the environment that has been set. So to get the desired behavior, we need to either reduce or add friction to the environment. We either need to make it easier or harder for us to perform the desired action in whatever area we are in. Now, sometimes we can't control that because we walk into an environment and it is already set. But so many times when we are aiming to develop conscious habits, we are the designers of that environment. And so we have to either reduce or add that friction. I think this is a really great analogy, mostly because I really love Top Chef. So I'm a big fan of Top Chef. So mise en place, which just means preparing all your ingredients before you start cooking. So you got all your vegetables chopped and you have your herbs and your spices out and you know exactly what goes into that dish. So you're not at the final stages and you say, oh, we don't have any eggs. I forgot we don't have those. So we can do the same things in our environment. We're going to prep all our ingredients before we start practicing or start doing anything that we want to do on a daily basis. So to set that environment, we need to think about a few things. First of all, We want one cue that initiates one action. So, for instance, I see my piano book open on the piano. That's my cue to initiate that action. I put a book on my bed first thing in the morning. So when I come to bed at night, I go, oh, yeah, I want to read this book, but make it very clear and obvious. Second is create a space that allows for focused attention. If I have my instrument in a room and I set the space for the instrument, but it's also a space where uh, there's a television and a lot of people are passing through, or I have a device close by that is going to interrupt me. I need to make sure that those distractions get taken away from that space. And if I can't take the distraction away from the space, then I need to create a different space. I need to find a different space. And I know that's difficult when it comes to a piano, but other instruments, it could be much more possible. So if you're in a space where the instrument can't move, or the thing that you want to create a habit out of cannot move, then reset the rest of the environment. Thirdly, set or reset the environment to initiate the sequence. And I, I have to say, I live in a house that is 110 years old this year. My house is 110 years old this year. And I have 4 floors in my house. So when I am in the basement and I need to go all the way up to the attic, there are often times when I just say, it's not that important. I don't want to walk up all 4 floors just to get this particular thing out of my 3rd floor of my house when I'm in the basement. It's the same thing when we go to our instruments and we say, oh, you know what? I left my books in the car. I don't want to go out and get them. So I'll just practice later. It's really important that your environment that you want to set, that you want to initiate the sequence, is ready for you when you get to that environment. When you come back from a lesson, when you come back from a performance, put everything back to what it was before you left, so that the next time you go to that space, it is ready for you and you don't have to go looking for your music or your pencil or whatever it is that you need in order to initiate the habit. Fourthly, and this is very helpful for a lot of the population, put a calming or focusing item in sight. It's so easy for us to have that flashlight, especially focusing inward on times when it needs to be focusing outward. It's important to notice that. And sometimes having a focusing item in sight is just the stimulus we need to say, oh, I am not paying attention here. I am not focusing on the task at hand. I am perceptually decoupling right now. So having that is just a reminder as to why you are there. And it could be something as simple as that there are a lot of like squishy toys that students have, a lot of fidget toys. It could be a particular picture that inspires you, anything that can bring you back to your purpose for being there. And then lastly, have a notebook nearby to write down off-task thoughts, because we all have those off-task thoughts all the time. All right. Creating that habit can also, there are a few other ways that you can help create that habit and really set the context. And one way is to create an implementation intention. So saying at this time, in this place, I will perform this action. So a few examples are at 7:30 in the morning, I'm going to practice my technique before school starts, let's say, if you're a student. After dinner, I will practice memory sections. At 9 p.m., I will mentally rehearse in my bedroom before I turn off the lights. When I get home from school, I will put my music books in the bag. Having very specifically timed actions really sets that context, because it's not so general as to the time and the place. I'll get to that sometime tonight is not quite as specific as I will do that right after I have dinner. So being very specific about the timing is very helpful. Another way we can do this is by habit stacking. I already do this thing, so I will add this. I will pair this thing to it. So every day when I get home from school, I have a snack. So while I'm having a snack, I'm going to pull out my music and do score study. That's an example of habit stacking. I inadvertently did this at the beginning of the pandemic. Um, I'm talking to the Seattle music teachers, so I assume you all have coffee in the morning. So every morning I have my cup of coffee. And remember back in 2020 when people were so optimistic and said, well, we have all this time, which we all realized was absolutely not true. We had far less time. But at the beginning, people said, oh, I have so much time. I'm going to compose a concerto. I'm going to learn a new language. And so I thought, sure, I'll brush up that high school Spanish and I'm going to get out Duolingo. And every morning I would have my coffee and I would do a lesson or two of Duolingo. That habit stack paired so strongly. I have now, as of this morning, have completed 1,425 days in a row of Duolingo. And that's the power of the habit stack, because you already have a habit so firmly in place that adding another element to it, another stimulus, another habit you want to develop, will create a stronger habit of the other as well. And the great thing is this, the brain is a prediction machine. So when you're out in a different environment, you will look for these cues no matter where you are, because the brain likes to know what's going on. It doesn't like a lot of surprises. So no matter what it is that you have created a habit out of, your brain is going to look for similar patterns in that new environment because it likes regularity, which is why habits are so important and also so hard to break if we don't want the habit anymore. So when we are setting a context, we really want to make our cues as visible as possible and as frictionless as possible. Now, if we're trying to break a bad habit, we want to add as much friction to our day as we possibly can, or to that habit. So if we no longer want to perform an action, I want to stop drinking coffee, I might have to stop doing Duolingo in the morning because that habit is so strongly paired. I don't want to stop drinking coffee though, so we're good. The next area, we go from context to repetition, because in order to learn something new, as we said, you really need that repetition to move the information into long-term memory so that we can draw it out as a habit. When we talk about repetition, I know there are a lot of downfalls to repetition, especially when it comes to mindless repetition. So we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty practice strategy of how do we repeat passages and stay focused and get the most benefit out of that practice strategy. We're going to talk about the overall repetition of a habit, because repetition is so important and it has to be consistent. If you miss a day, you could probably get back on track. If you miss 2 or 3, that neural connection starts to break down and the habits will no longer be as sticky. So we really have to willfully decide that we repeat an action again and again, even when it's struggle, so that we can get it to that autopilot stage. So it's the small steps that really matter. I'm going to practice at 7:30 p.m. Well, 7:30 p.m. comes around 2 weeks later after you've started practicing at 7:30 and you go, oh my goodness, I'm so tired. I can't even get off the couch to go over to the piano bench. I'm just exhausted. The important point of this is not that you go to the piano and practice for your normal hour practice session. What's important is that you go to the piano and play for 5 minutes. Because what we're focusing on is not the extent of the practice, the quantity of the practice. We're focusing on building the habit. So 5 minutes, if that's all you have in you on that particular day, great. Because you want to keep the habit going. The next night at 7:30, if this is something that works for you, will likely be fine. And you could practice a little bit longer. So when you feel like doing more than the normal habit, do more than the normal habit. When you feel like doing just your hour practice and that's what you've said you will do, then that's what you do. But if all you have in you is 5 minutes, do the 5 minutes. Because likely when you get there for 5 minutes, that 5 minutes turns into 10 minutes. And then the 10 minutes turns into 20 minutes. So it could be that you have more in you than you think, but it could be that really this is all I have in me. And that's fine because you're reinforcing the habit. So as the quote says, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, which, you know, we're musicians. We often let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And our last step of the process is reward. Now, reward has a lot of connotation to it, and it comes with a lot of baggage. So we're not talking about rewards as in stickers or candy or food or trophies, although you might talk about it that way. We're talking about rewarding the consistency of the habit. Because if we set the context and we repeat it, unless we are really motivated to do that every day, unless we have some sort of reward for doing that, then all the context and repetition in the world isn't going to help. There has to be something that keeps us coming back. And one of the things is dopamine, the feel-good chemical. And I know this dopamine gets talked about a lot in terms of rewards because it's the neurotransmitter that is released when we have something that that we are rewarded by, or something that is wonderful about our lives. So whether that is having a great lesson or a great performance or looking forward to a performance or even holiday, we release dopamine. And dopamine is necessary for learning. It's not just this feel good, oh great, we have dopamine, we're all happy. It facilitates the passage of information from one neuron to another. And this is how we learn. It's that transmission. So if we have that release of dopamine, the neurons that fire together, wire together, are going to work in unity a lot better. And what's interesting about dopamine is that it releases in anticipation of a reward. So even if we don't have the reward, if we think about getting the reward, if we think, oh, this is going to be so great, I'm going to have the best lesson, this performance, I'm so looking forward to it. Or you think about, oh, the holiday coming up, I'm so excited about this holiday. We get the release of dopamine. It's often why we have those, like the holiday blues, because once they're over, what do we have to look forward to? So we have to build in these moments of, oh, I can't wait. I can't wait to see everybody at the MTNA conference. That's another way you can have this release of dopamine. And it is the immediate reward that gets reinforced. So even if it's a long way away, so MTNA conference is in a month, I can still reinforce that every day by seeing what they're posting on Instagram and saying, oh my gosh, they're featuring the keynote speakers. Oh, look how great Tim Topham. I can't wait to hear him in person. So we can get these immediate rewards, even if an event or that thing we are looking forward to is a bit in the future. If there is no reward, then the dopamine decreases, and we will avoid that in the future. So we talked about stopping the unwanted habits. It is hard because we look forward to that thing that we've established. So we really have to decrease the dopamine, that excitement, that anticipation, in order to stop the habit. And unexpected rewards, things that we don't know are going to happen, but we have a feeling they're going to happen. That's a dopamine goldmine. That's when the dopamine really starts firing and we get a lot of excitement and enjoyment out of whatever the stimulus is. So one of the good and bad things about living in 2024 are phones. Technology is just a treasure trove of unexpected rewards. The occasional reward just keeps us coming back. Oh, I got a like on my Instagram post. Oh, look at all these people who liked it. Oh, these people commented. I don't know that they're going to comment or like or share, but they might. And so I'm going to check. That infinite loop keeps us engaged. We keep refreshing the page or the site because, oh, something new could have happened. Or, websites have been very purposeful about that infinite loop because the content never ends. In the early days of Facebook, you actually got to the end of the page and had to press next to get to more content. And they realized they were losing users because they had to click next. And so now we can just keep going and going. But this is also triggered by our environment. So when we don't have to raise hands or anything, but you get up, you check your phone. I do. When you're bored, you check your phone. Yes. When you need a mental break, when that executive function has been depleted and you're just tired and stressed out and you just can't deal with life, you check your phone. When you go to bed, last thing you do, you check your phone. We have these reward systems built into technology, and they are immediate. They are immediate. So much so that we have lost a little bit of the ability, and I'm not going to say everybody, but we lose our ability to have these long-term goals and long-term rewards. Why do I need a long-term reward when I have all these ways right in the palm of my hand to get lots of rewards right now? They're not so satisfying all the time. That long-term reward might be a whole lot more satisfying, but I have all these immediate rewards right at the tip of my fingers. So much so. Here's shocking statistics. The average American spends 5 hours and 4 minutes on smart devices. We check our phones 96 times a day, and we touch our phones. And I find this shocking, but again, I believe it. We touch our phones 2,617 times a day on average. So maybe you are average, maybe you're below average, but that's a lot of engagement with a device that can give us immediate rewards. And we have all of these media habits that are rewarding, that are kind of sabotaging our abilities to develop other habits. So looking up information that's not task relevant, avoiding difficult work by web surfing. Again, you can nod your heads if you want or shake your heads. Refreshing social media, creating requisite digital warm-ups. I don't know if any of you have this, but I have to check this email account, then I have to check my social media, then I have to check CNN, then I can start my day. We get in this habit of having these sequences of digital engagement before we can do anything else. And as our executive function becomes depleted during the day at various points, we go back to those habits. Checking your email without the intention to respond, just saying, oh, I wonder if I have an email. And searching for news stories on several platforms. Now, the difficulty of this is we understand that this is an issue, that we all do it. But what happens is we have these interrupting media habits while we're trying to stay on task with other more task relevant things in our day. So you see students practicing the piano and then going, oh, I'm tired. I'm going to check my social media for just a minute. And then 20 minutes later, they're still checking their social media because of that infinite loop. It's because of that executive function depletion. So we have to understand when we are getting tired, when we are stressed, when we need to take that break so that we can establish more proactive habits that can replenish the executive functioning. So we don't get so off task, because what happens then is I sit down at the piano and I start pairing that habit of checking my phone with the habit of scheduling my practice time. So those habits start to stack upon one another. And there I have created a habit stack that is not something that is beneficial in my day. So moving the phone to another room, perhaps. So all of this with rewards, though, yes, we need to help our students and ourselves identify those long-term rewards and have daily motivation or daily engagement with the reward, if it is a longer-term reward. We can also encourage identity-based rewards. So this is the type of person I want to be, and every action I participate in is a vote for that type of person. I want to be a musician. So every time I sit down at the piano, I am rewarded by engaging with music. You could use this for any part of your life. I want to create a healthier lifestyle. So every time I engage with these certain activities, it's a reward and a vote for that type of person. So we can help our students identify those kinds of identity-based rewards. So that becomes a more internal motivation versus all the external rewards that we tend to engage with in life. All right, so I'm just going to give a bit of a conclusion here so we can wrap up these three areas, starting with context. So we want to create cues that are visible and frictionless. We want to maintain that 1-to-1 ratio, so 1 cue, 1 habit. We could create implementation intentions and habit stacks. And then we can add friction to change any unwanted habits that we might have. Next is our repetition. I put this at the top, have a plan B. I don't feel like doing this, so I'm not going to do it. I'm just too tired. 2 minutes is better than nothing at all. And I think that's where we get a little bit stuck, is that, well, I just can't do this right now. Find the shortest period of time that does work and just do it. And if that's all you can do, then that's all you can do. Don't skip days, and then know that it's going to take attention and effort at first. It's not I'm going to do this every day and it's just going to become a habit. You really have to work at it to establish that habit. Build in prompts and pauses to help you maintain focus, and move to another location when you're distracted. So don't, again, build that unwanted habit onto the habit that you're really trying to build. And then lastly, rewards. One thing I like to encourage my students to do is leave practice sessions with I wonder questions. This is those Zeigarnik intrusions that I was talking about earlier. If something is left unfinished, then it gives me that motivation to want to go back and figure it out. It gives you an opportunity for an unexpected reward. I put this one in here, don't should yourself, because my husband and I started doing this to each other a few years ago, where I would say, don't should yourself. When you say, I should have done this. I should have said this. I can't believe I did this. I should have done this instead. Keep your associations positive. So I should have practiced longer. I should have done this instead. Right? Stay positive. I should have practiced longer, but I did build the habit. I did reinforce the habit. So that's great. Track your everyday actions, because those long-term goals and motivations might seem so far away that the reward it just isn't worth the payoff. So find the everyday rewards that can get you to that bigger reward. And connect your habits to your identity, not necessarily an outcome. I will leave you with this quote, which I love very much. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. So if your systems are in place to create efficiencies to get to those goals, then those goals are very achievable. It will just take a little bit of action and effort and casting a vote for the type of person you want to be every day. I'm going to end that here and leave you with questions if there are any. And I'm going to stop screen sharing, I think. There. All right. So thank you so much for listening to all my research. And I hope this left you with some good ideas on how to help yourself establish habits and your students as well. Are there any questions or comments?
I have a question. First of all, this was so fascinating, and I recognized myself in many of your early slides in the presentation in terms of distractions and things like that. Is age a factor in how long it takes or can take to build a habit or create a new habit? I find with my adult students, particularly my older adult students, they seem to actually have like they're more interested in repetition, and they're more interested in practicing and setting up a practice routine, and many kids are too, but I find it's harder for them in many ways. So I guess that's my question: is age a factor?
Absolutely. You think about the attention span of children versus adults, and we are able to, as adults, set intentions a lot more effectively than children are. We're able to understand the short and long-term goals of what we're trying to establish. It's that, I always joke with my students. I say, your prefrontal cortex isn't there yet. You'll get there, right? You just haven't gone through that whole development of prefrontal cortex. So we are able to see, establish that better. We also see cause and effect a lot more easily too. So understanding, oh, well, here are examples of how I've done things that have created efficiencies for myself. So yeah, I want to do this within my practice world too, because I understand how it has helped in other areas where children are they're doing what their parents tell them to do most of the time, hopefully, and their teachers. But they're just not able to see that efficiency as readily as adults can. So I think for many children, if we're talking about our students, it takes a lot of parental involvement to understand, what does your child do on a typical day? Where are the moments of peak attention and energy? What other activities are they engaging in? Because 7:30 at night for one student might be fine. Another student might have had chess club after school, and then they were picked up and they went to volleyball practice, and then they came home and had to eat dinner, and then they had a lot of homework to do because they have tests. And so that 7:30 is just, it's either too busy or they're exhausted. So really being in communication with parents to understand where the peaks and valleys are in the day.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Any other questions or comments?
It was great. It was very weird to feel a lot of the things you were talking about happening in the middle of the presentation. I'm like, this is a great presentation. Why am I suddenly looking at something else? Or like you'd say something that would send me like, oh, I'm gonna go look that up on a website real quick. And it's like, what am I doing? Go back to the presentation.
Absolutely. Well, and it's so difficult when we're, I think in-person presentations, while they are easier, we still have our phones with us. So we can still think, oh, that's a really interesting thing. Let me check that on my phone. Or, oh, look, I just got a text. I want to check whatever this is in case it's important. But I think being on screen for meetings, for professional development, it's just too easy. I try to close everything. All my, if you ever saw my browser on a typical day, there are so many tabs open. So you're trying to juggle all these different aspects of your life. And so during meetings or presentations like this, I close all the tabs because I know it's just too tempting to like, oh, I'm just going to go look at this.
Um, I have a student who is clearly neurodivergent,
Mhm.
and he has both the ability to concentrate extraordinarily focusedly, if that's a word, and but also be completely distracted by he doesn't wear socks, for example, because the ridges on socks distract or affect his toes. Could you talk a little bit more about that and strategies that you found that are really useful?
Mhm. That it is really difficult because we talk about neurodivergent, um, and we could talk about all these different categories like ADHD and ADD and autism, and the list goes on and on. Um, every student, every human being is different. So to say neurodivergent and how do we deal with uh, learning with this student, we really just have to deal with learning with that student. So whatever it is that student needs, that's the beauty of teaching, is that we get to figure that out with the student and the parents. So like you said, he doesn't like to wear socks. That's why one of the things I put in the list of external distractions was clothing, because I know there are certain students who can't wear certain types of material because they just can't focus because the material is just bothersome. Um, so it is about finding those ways in which you can uh, help the student maintain focus while also being able to pull them out of focus when necessary. So um, it might be you set up certain strategies for your lessons. So we do things in blocks. We are going to focus on this for this many minutes, and then we need to take a sensory break, because I know we talk about ADHD all the time and the lack of being able to pay attention, but on the flip side, there are so many humans that have that laser focus where, there could be sirens going off and they don't even pay attention because they're so narrowly focused. So taking sensory breaks are great. Okay, we're going to work on this, and then I want you to take a walk around the room, take a lap and come back. It could be we're going to, maybe it's auditory. We need to listen to this other piece of music over on the other side of the room, whether it's YouTube or, CD play or something. Sensory breaks. It could be, I mentioned like fidget toys. My daughter actually has, it's like a gummy thing. So it's not sticky or it doesn't leave a residue on the fingers, but it's a squishy thing. So doing something sensory wise to just reset the brain, and then going back to focusing on what would be next, whether it's a continuation of what had been focused on, or something new, if you just need to reset the lesson so that they can, like, like really, it's almost like a physical movement away from what they were doing and onto the next activity. But it's really just what works for your students. And that's where parents can be very helpful as well, because they will likely have tricks up their sleeves.
But that's great. So when I teach, I have two pianos side by side. But I could demonstrate on his piano instead of doing it on mine, and that would get him to stand up, and then just that's thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And it the way that you say that or bring that up, it reminds me of like what's just accepted gospel if you go to like a gym or something, is you don't sit there and do everything in a row. You do a little bit of something and then you take a few minutes, and then you do a little bit of something and you take a few minutes, and like whatever, pull the boundaries on that to adjust for music lessons or something, but the spirit's the same.
Yes. And I think we get these students that do have this laser-like focus, and we think, oh, well, I have hit the jackpot, because this student will sit and just have this laser focus, and that is wonderful. But then we realize that there is this inability to switch to different tasks, and it takes a little bit of momentum for them to be able to switch from this stimulus to whatever you want them to engage with next. And then you realize, oh, well, that focus is a little bit too good. So coming up with strategies to help that along.
Hi, wonderful presentation. So much to think about. Yeah, I mean, I felt like in some ways my mind was spinning out and kind of like, oh, and that happened in lessons and that happened in lessons too. But I suppose that's how our neural pathways connect everything together, to function in life. Going to what you were talking about with habit forming, what I think all of us have those students who are very, very tightly scheduled, that they come home, they say they come home at 7 o'clock most nights, and at the same time they want to do piano. But what is one thing that we can tell them, or in some cases their parents, that would help them to set a habit of practicing at least 10 minutes, on the days that they're very scheduled?
Mhm. I know our students they're busy. They have a lot of things going on. And I say that as the mother of a 15 and 13-year-old. So I understand how things can get crazy. It is again the conversation with the parents, because the more you can make the practice habitual, the less you have to work it into the schedule, because it's just part of the routine. I would imagine, and this is coming from experience with kids who are 15 and 13, our days are pretty regimented because they have to be. There are days where there is no wiggle room, and there are handoffs between myself and my husband, and oh, you go get this kid and I'll get the other kid, and so it is very tightly scheduled. I would imagine most parents have to do the same things at home, so they know where those breaks are, but they also understand how important that schedule is, and making the case with them that if piano is just part of that routine, how much more the student will progress and be happier in their studies. No one wants to come to a lesson ill prepared. That is no one's intention. So having these moments of, okay, when is this possible to do, if not daily, most days? So that, okay, we have on these days, we could do this time of the day, but on these days it's not possible, so we kick it to this time. What are other activities that are going on in the house that can pair with that? when they get home from school, is it possible that they could do this and that together? You know, you have some downtime, have a snack, then go practice for 10 minutes. And just building in these pockets of practice, because sometimes that's even more effective than thinking, oh, I have to have an hour. I have to carve off this hour. But if you could say, well, 15 minutes here, and then we have 10 minutes here, and we have 10 minutes here. Okay. Then
That's great. Yeah.
Right.
So what you're talking about, and this is very cool, is kind of like having a game plan. You're setting it up ahead of time. And you have a plan for like, if X, then Y to get your practice, rather than just sort of reacting to the day like, oh, we have to be here, and oh, there's no time, and oh, I should really practice, but oh, the day is over. So thank you. That's a great way to put it.
And think about the systems that we are setting our students up with. One of the challenges of teaching adolescents is that they have no prefrontal cortex development. So as they go through their adolescence, that prefrontal cortex in the brain, it goes through this huge growth spurt, and then it starts to prune things away. So activities in which they're engaged with will strengthen, and activities they are not engaged with will just die away. So think about all those executive functioning skills that the prefrontal cortex controls: attention, nuanced thinking, decision-making, time management, long and short-term goal development. Those are areas of the brain that, if used during the adolescent period, will stick through adulthood. So by helping them manage their time and helping them understand that you have to set a schedule and do things regularly and understand where, you know, priorities, things like that, you're actually helping them be more efficient adults. So I think, you know, we don't just teach piano. We don't just teach music. We are teaching a lot of skills to our students. And I think this is one very important skill that I see time and time again with my college students, whether they have it or not. It's it's pretty obvious.
Wow.
Any other questions that have come up?
I usually have the student go through the stuff. This is for the teenager or early teens. And then write down the agenda of the week. Let's focus the block for the 3 days. Have to be 2 or 3 days in a row. Well, in that case, they touch other kind of all the things, but they focus working on something. And then, or maybe the next 3 days, do some other thing. But anyway, about the repetition, I find that I'm getting older. My memory is harder. So the way I do it to my student, I have them, so everyone have to do theory. Then they can, you know, analyze the music before they touch it. Separate into session, phrase, something like that, and the chord progression. And that way, I find that they will cut down the time for repetition and have a better memory. I don't know, I need your input for me to improve that way.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is the building of the theory.
Memorization.
Okay. And how it applies to their musical learning.
And their schedule is so busy, they won't have that much time to practice. If you ask them to practice with repeat over and over, that involve a lot of time.
Right. Well, and like I said, we didn't get a lot into repetition of phrases or musical excerpts because we were talking more about habit formation and the importance of repetition there. But mindless repetition of phrases or excerpts, of course, is another big ball of wax that we could talk about for a very long time, because you get into this, the where are you shining your flashlight thing. I think the variation of those passages is very helpful. So I'm not just playing it the same way over and over. I'm changing the tempo, I'm changing the articulation, the dynamics, so I can hear it differently. I focus on different aspects of the phrase every time I play it, instead of I'm just going to play it and play it and play it and play it. So it really goes into tactile memory instead of oral memory and visual memory and procedural memory and all this elaborative memory. There are a lot of different ways we need to learn in order to learn, not just being able to tactily hash it out. I think what you're hitting on with theory is really important, because that is a level of knowing that's not just sitting at the piano or sitting at the instrument and playing it over and over. It's a level of knowing that goes deeper into the musical ideas and the foundation of the music. So it's an important kind of knowing. What's also great about that is we often talk to our students about, when are you going to practice? And so what that means to them is, when are you going to sit at your instrument and play your instrument? But practice can also mean score study away from the instrument. It can also mean theory, doing your theory assignments. That's practicing too, because it builds that foundational knowledge. You know, one thing about long-term memory, and this is in the spring issue of the Piano Inspires Kids, is that it's not just one thing. It's not just, I'm putting this information in my brain like I'm putting a book on a bookshelf, but it's more like a spider web. So what does this theory mean? This theory knowledge I just learned, how does that connect to the piece I'm playing? How does it connect to the oral skills I have? How does it connect to the form of the piece? How does it connect to all the different things I know about the composer? That is knowing. That is secure knowledge. So we need to also say, well, okay, well, you can get to your instrument for this amount of time. Could you do your score study in the car going from school to volleyball? Could you do your theory pages while, in your room at night before you go to bed? Where can you carve out time to learn that's not at the instrument? Because that's just as important. Did that answer your question?
It's again ridiculous. I got myself sent over to Piano Inspires Kids. I'm like, oh, I gotta get I should make this something my students have to read or something. This seems like a great idea.
You should. I could show you the cover of the spring issue if you want. I'm so excited.
Sure, absolutely.
Get a little preview.
Please.
It just came to us from the designers, so it's not in paper form yet, but here it is, stick in the brain.
That's great.
So we have lots of interesting information. 100 years of Rhapsody in Blue, and our amazing brains at work, and inside the pianist's brain. So it's going to be a really great issue. I'm really excited about this. And then summer is all about the Summer Olympics and music, and how we prepare for performance, and managing performance anxiety, and everything that goes along with that. So we're excited about that one too.
Is it all digital, or do they send out a print edition?
Print. It is print.
I see.
We insisted on print because Sarah Ernst and I both have children that are about the same age as hers. Are just like her oldest straddles my two, and then she has one that's a few years younger. And we know how we use children's magazines at home, and you have to get the pencil out and do the activities and be able to do some actual circling of things and answering questions.
Very vivid memories of reading Ranger Rick or zoo books and stuff like that. The various children's biology and zoology and just Northwest woodsiness kids magazines, and they're impactful.
Yes. And it's just nice to have something that's not digital,
mhm.
our children, because everything is digital. So
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I really can't thank you adequately. That was a great presentation.
well, thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah.
It was great to meet you all. Maybe if you're at MTNA, please at the conference next month, please find me. I'll be running around somewhere. So they keep us busy because I'm on the board until March 21st, and then I will no longer be on the board. So I think Peter still has another year of being president, so he'll be around.
Awesome. Well, see you in Atlanta. And again, you know, for whatever distractions they may offer, it is nice that because we are digital, you were able to join us.
Exactly. It was
So-
lovely being in Seattle virtually. I'll come visit in person someday.
Good, you should. It's nice. All right. Have a good
Okay.
day.
Well, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.